Isaiah 52:13 through 53:12. Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up and shall be exalted. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him, for that which has not been told them they see, and that which they have not heard they understand. Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. And they made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong. Because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. This is the word of the Lord.
The passage we're looking at this morning is a profound one. We would say that everything in the Bible is important. It's all there for a reason, but there's certainly certain passages that it takes some work to figure out its relevance to the whole. The passage we're looking at this morning is so packed with important things that you could keep returning to it and finding new insights. And the more you understand this, the more you'll understand Christianity. For example, if you understand Isaiah 53 and then keep studying Romans, you'll see how informed the New Testament was by this portion of Isaiah. So Isaiah is forward-looking. It's written hundreds of years before Jesus, and it anticipates his coming. But in this passage, it has such specific things that first century Christians couldn't help but think, this is happening in our time. And the opening verse that was read speaks about the exaltation of Jesus. And it's exaltation that we want. We want to come together to celebrate. We want to worship. And it's also what we want in our own lives. We want our lives to, we want our future to be better than the present. We want to ascend. We want our lives to increase and move up. But there's something difficult about life in this world, which is it seems that the pattern of life is shaped like a bell curve, where there is usually some growth, some progress, some ascending, but then there's a peak, and then there's a downward component. And the distribution is not even. Some people very early in life have such difficult that their happiest years were early childhood. Most of us would recognize that as tragic. I think we assume the kind of normal midlife crisis that there's a period, however we define midlife, where we reach some sort of peak. And it's a difficult period for those going through it. And to the degree that there is a midlife crisis, people are different. Why do they go through it? Well, One aspect of moving into whatever those middle years are is the realization that you had hopes and dreams and aspirations that weren't realized. And when you're younger, you could redirect or you could work harder, but you get to a point where you start to realize, I always assumed I would have this, I always desperately wanted this, and now I think I need to accept I may have to live the rest of my life without it, and it feels like it's downward from there. Sometimes, actually, people in midlife find themselves getting most of what they wanted and longed for, but finding themselves dissatisfied. And then the trouble is you recognize the pattern that whenever I got to a point of dissatisfaction, I set a new goal and I worked for it, and actually I've just been keeping myself busy. And once you realize that nothing is ultimately satisfying, if that realization is deep within you, then new goal setting, new accomplishments, new achievements, though they're possible, lose their power, lose their force. And so those are just a couple of examples of how we get to that place. But so many of us wind up in a place where we feel like there's the phrase, it's all downhill from here. That's not what we want. We want more uphill, we want more excitement, we want growth, progress. Jesus comes and he says there are many paths, many ways to make it through this world, and all of them lead to the grave. And then he says, but I will open a way and lead you on a way that ascends. I will give you life itself. And he offers something so powerful, so desirable, so profound, that it makes many of us look at him and say, okay, show me what that way is. And then it appears that he does the opposite. It appears that his life, from the time he says that, goes downhill, where a climactic moment in the Gospels is his being crucified. That does not look like upward mobility. That looks like the very worst of what we fear and dread. And somehow Jesus is presenting to us an alternative to this world, where the world offers life as a bell curve, where we have some moment of success or achievement and then decline. And Christianity presents Jesus sort of an inverted bell curve where he was exalted, but then he descends and he comes down to meet us at the very bottom. And it's at the bottom that then he will lead us forward. And so actually there's something in the very lowest of Jesus' experience that can bring about the biggest turnaround in our lives, that it's actually a passage that begins talking about the exalted nature of the servant who will come, and then speaking in gory detail about the misery he will experience. How does this hold together? Well, I'm alluding to verse 13 in chapter 52. Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up. He shall be exalted. That's the introduction to this passage. But what we're going to spend our time walking through is not his exaltation, but his humiliation. But we do it because that's why he's so exalted. And actually, that's why there's hope for our own ascension, if we hear him, if we answer his invitation, if we follow him. So our longings to ascend are only satisfied in the one who descended. And so I'm going to look at three things today: how bad things are, how good God is, and how wise we need to be. So I'm beginning with how bad things are. So this passage talks about the one who will be exalted, but it's about his suffering. So Isaiah has in it, in this section that we're in, what they call these 4 servant songs, songs about a future servant who will come, that in Isaiah's day, they may have, God's people may have thought, we are the servant collectively, God's people. But as the story of the Bible goes on, early Christians saw, no, it was actually one individual who comes from these people, from God's people. And Isaiah 53 is not just about a servant, but about what's come known as the suffering servant, the servant who suffers. And the fact that he suffers tells us something about how problematic the human condition is, how troubled our world is. And so you could see that in verse 6 of chapter 53. One description of humanity and our sinfulness or our alienation from God. There's different ways of describing it. Chapter 53, verse 6 says, "All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way." And so the Bible begins with humanity walking with God, but then there's a turning away from God. It's about betrayal. It's about a lack of trust. It's about pride. All of these things that individually we could sort of try to be specific about particular sins or breaking rules and the impact that it has. But this picture that we're like sheep who have gone astray, we have turned away from God to what we assume is our own way. That picture informs us. That tells us a lot. And so the problem is we wander like sheep. And I remember many years ago interacting with a guy who was pretty skeptical about religion, but also maybe a bit angry about it. His interactions with me were less of an exchange of ideas or an openness to hearing where I was coming from. And he was somebody that carried with him some anger. And I remember one of the things he kept saying is, religious people are like sheep. And fair enough, maybe religions will attract more conformist types or people who are maybe a little bit anxious and looking for a solution. And so that's true, certainly, of Christians. But in his saying, religious people are like sheep, he seemed to be claiming for himself a certain independence, a certain freedom from not going the path that all of the gullible were going. And the Bible actually says, well, it's not simply that we're like sheep, but we're like sheep who have gone astray. All of us. So it's not simply that we're like sheep, but we're like sheep who have wandered. And one interesting thing about sheep is sheep don't have the incentive to go astray because they're very vulnerable animals. They're very timid. They're very fearful. And they have the incentive to stay with the flock. So if a sheep wanted to go astray, it would probably be too nervous. It would go wherever the flock was going. And so when sheep go astray, it's usually because they get distracted. Maybe they're walking along saying, I need to be with the flock. I'm afraid I'm going to, ooh, something to eat. And then they just focus on that thing and they get lost without realizing it. Or some thief comes in to lure the sheep away, to steal them. And so the sheep is inherently a follower and just winds up following the wrong leader. And that description of the human condition, that we are meant to walk with God, to have a fullness of life, in the very beginning of the Bible, there's deception. It's not that we would want to leave God, but we get distracted by things and then realize we're lost, we're vulnerable. There was a news item about 20 years ago that a community in Turkey where numerous families who owned lots of sheep put all their sheep in one field and they were going to sit down to have breakfast together. And the sheep were kept they weren't worried about them wandering because they were near a cliff, and so thought that outer boundary would keep them safe. And one sheep, for whatever reason, went over the cliff, and then 1,500 sheep, one by one, just followed that over the cliff. 400 of the sheep died, and the rest didn't die because they landed on 400 sheep. but still wound up being wounded. This awful thing that they thought, well, there's security here, and because one went over, the rest just followed blindly. The picture of the Bible is not that human beings are independent, but actually we're all like sheep, but that first human being who went astray set a pattern, a direction where every human being after them is going on some path, but it's not the path of life. And it's that issue that needs to be dealt with. And so as we go into the issues here, with the skeptical person that I was talking with, yes, okay, religious people could be naive. Maybe we're not really thinking and we're just following Christianity because it promises something we desire. But human beings are social. And one of the things through this interaction is I wasn't getting a lot of independent ideas. I was getting a lot of canned phrases from this individual that made it sound not that he was thinking for himself, but that he had joined with a skeptical community. where they were reinforcing their ideas, that it also seemed like he was following someone. And that's true of all of us. We're not as original as we think. And when we think of the independent person who is not affected by anyone, maybe we picture the individual who goes off in the woods to live by themselves, not to be affected by society. But actually, wouldn't a healthy human being be able to interact with other people? Is the independent person who can't live with anyone the true individual? I think Jesus presents a better model of a true individual, somebody who was not lured in, did not fall for the bait, was not tempted, but was also not isolated. He was able to come among people and not become like them, but call them to a better way. What's interesting is if it is true that Jesus was the true distinct individual, the one that forged his own path, if you think of it that way, what's striking about how bad things are is precisely what we did in response to him. And that's where, as we look at this passage, and to think, what is it about Jesus that elicited that human response, where we hated him, we rejected him, we crucified him? It's not simply that we all have our own path, we're doing our own thing, but there's something very insecure about it, that somebody who loves us, somebody who speaks truthfully, somebody who invites us, stirs in us something that provokes us. So here's a number of things we could recognize about humanity as we look at the response to the servant who had come. In verse 2 of chapter 53, the description of the servant is that he would have no form or majesty that we should look at him, no beauty that we should desire him. And so highlighting superficial humanity, how do we determine quality? How do we determine excellence? We do it by looking to others. What institutions would affirm this person? What accomplishments, what achievements? It's almost as if we don't have discernment, so collectively we try to put together some way of discerning, is this person of value? And Jesus didn't come with those things, and so people didn't recognize just who he was. There was no beauty that we would desire him, no majesty that we should look at him, so we didn't. Secondly, verse 9, so we killed him, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. You know, the world is complicated, and so it's always hard to sort out right or wrong when something happens, because you could always point to something, you could always spin something. What's remarkable about Jesus is he's the one human who walked this earth without sin. So there's nothing we could say that he provoked us or he misled us. We just have to sit with the fact that he had done no violence. There was no deceit in his mouth. He did not misrepresent. He did not try to trick us. There was something in his perfection that makes it more striking to think, why did we not rejoice? Why did we not listen? Why did we respond with hostility? And that's the next thing in verse 3. What is the response to this servant? The one who is not one of violence, one who is not a deceiver. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, as one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. So this servant will come into the world, sent by God for the world's good, and we will miss his goodness, and something will cause us to reject him. And most of Jesus' ministry, people are drawn to him, they're a little bit confused by things, but it reaches that climactic moment where some people who had it in from the beginning are able to turn an entire crowd to start yelling, "Crucify." How do we get caught up in that? That it's not simply that we don't esteem him, but we hide our faces from him because what we did to him was so awful and violent that we couldn't bear to look at it. And so verse 4 says, we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. So that's the thing, is we hated him and rejected him. And then when we crucified him, the conclusion must be, look how God must hate this person. And that's the issue of going astray. We take the place of God. We assume that we are God, or we project some concept of God that we assume God must be like us. Could God be different? Could God be distinct? Could God be independent of us and be right and we are wrong? Or are we always looking for a God that is the God we desire, the God that makes sense to us, a God that won't challenge us, but a God who will conform to our expectations? When we do that, then, since we think God is aligned with us rather than our being aligned with God, when we reject the upright, we have to think that this is God's agreement, that Jesus was suffering. We esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. And so that's our unbelief. That's how chapter 53 opens up. Who has believed what he has heard from us? Here's this testimony of the servant, and he will come, and instead of receiving him, who was announced in advance, we fulfill the very prophecy that says when he comes, you will reject him, you'll despise him. And so the application to this, why go through this? Because it is so discouraging to think, are we really, do all of us have the potential deep in us that when push comes to shove, we will get so angry that we would crucify the innocent, that we would participate in this injustice? If the crowd yelled loud enough, we would stop being able to have the clarity for ourselves that we would join in. The troubling aspect of that reality is helpful for us to think about, because it says if the problem is that deep, we need more than just another chance. We need more than just better teaching. We need salvation. There's something deep in us that if we are like sheep who have gone astray, what we need is not simply a better program or a better community, but we need something much deeper, much more profound. And the reason that this chapter is such good news is because it exposes us and our deep need, but it does so in light of also revealing God's goodness. And so this is what allows us to catch ourselves and to say, maybe I shouldn't walk alone. Maybe I should choose my own way, but maybe I should pay more attention to who actually is offering an ascending path, the path of life. And so that brings us to the next thing, which is how good God is. So we could look at how bad things are, which we need to do because it's honest, it's truthful. But this passage shows us how bad things are because it's revealing how good God is, and that's where change happens. So at the end of chapter 52, verse 14, many were astonished. The word here, astonished, has a negative impulse. It's not that we were so impressed, but that this figure, this servant, though he did not deceive, though there was no violence in him, was so marred. We so dehumanized this person that there was something astonishing, something shocking in this moment. So what is it that we could start to see if we look not simply at the anger that we project onto this one, but if we look at the one who is receiving this, what do we see? Well, 53:3 says, he was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And some of us have an assumption that God is this grumpy being in the sky who's very testy, who easily gets offended, who's eager to just violently express and destroy. And so wouldn't his servant, the one that he sent to be like that? And we find that he is not this morose individual who comes always trying to find fault with things, but God in his very being is glorious. And so there's goodness, there's holiness, he's filled with love, which means all of the things that we associate with love, of joy and compassion, are part of his very being. We are wrong to think that he's grumpy like we are. Jesus was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, not because he had a temperamental problem that needed to be fixed, but because this is what he chose. He is the one who descended, the one sent by God into troubled humanity. And so he shares in our griefs. He comes into this troubled world. And how could you not come into this world being a person of truth with no violence and not become a man of sorrows? Somebody who's not going to look away from the suffering and the injustice, but somebody who will come very aware of it and how problematic it is. How would he not be a man of sorrows? This is how Jesus is portrayed. He's somebody who acquainted himself with grief. That's in his character. It's not that he is a grieving person, but he came into this world to call us, willing to acquaint himself with grief in order to come and change things. And so that's where this passage shows the nature of his suffering. It's not simply that he was a victim, but that he willingly chose this, giving himself in order to bring change. So verse 5 of chapter 53, he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought peace. With his wounds, we are healed. And that's what's so remarkable. The language here of peace, of healing, the very things that we want, the very things that we're fighting for, we're trying to problem solve, we're trying to use all that we have to make progress on. And generation after generation, we go to war and we resent and we have to deal with crime and all of these things. And here's one who comes to acquaint himself with these things, and he does these things for us. That's the clear teaching. He was pierced, but it was for our transgressions. He was crushed, but it's for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement, but here's the remarkable thing that brought us peace. It's with his wounds we are healed. And that's what's so hard to grasp, which is why this passage is so precious, because it's not saying anything new about Christianity that if you're familiar with the basic Christian message, you wouldn't have picked up. But it is hammering again and again these points. Verse 6, the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. We all are like sheep that have gone astray, every one of us. But the Lord has laid on him this iniquity. He became acquainted with grief in order that we would become people who have peace. That is what's so remarkable. What is it about God that that's his nature, that we are so suspicious that we turn away, but God is so gracious that he pursues us? That's what's so remarkable. And so if we are like sheep who have gone astray, verse 7 describes the servant as a lamb, a sheep. He becomes one of us. He doesn't simply come as the good shepherd. There's a long tradition in the Bible from the Passover story about a lamb that would be killed so that his blood would signal that the angel of death would pass over those households, or then the sacrificial system. It's so hard to understand why that system. And without going into the details, somehow it communicated that one day someone would come to be the substitute, to take the place, this servant. We are like sheep who have gone astray. He went like a lamb, silently to the slaughter. We were shouting at him because we can't contain our anger, and he just bore it, because that's why he came, to give himself. So verse 11 says, by his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. He shall bear their iniquities. So God is clear and truthful. All people are like sheep who have gone astray. This one servant who comes is righteous. So then why is it that we would get to do this to him and he would bear it? Because by this one faithful servant, what he knows, his insight, many will be accounted righteous. He will bear their iniquities. And that's the thing, is we're constantly trying to justify ourselves, to make an argument that we are righteous. If only people knew how complicated it was, then they would understand why I'm such a problematic person. And we're encouraging one another to make these arguments, and God says there's a better way. I know how troubled you are. I know what's happened to you. I know what you've done. I know what you think. And instead of coming to reject you, I've come to invite you. And we say, well, that's hard. It is. But he's the one who bears it. He's the one who comes to us, even in our hostility, while we're fighting, trying to push away. And he says, but I will send my servant, the righteous one, who does no violence. And you, the unrighteous, will do violence. And somehow there will be an exchange made. He will bear your iniquity and hostility, and you will be covered by his righteousness. And that's what frees us. It frees us from it stops the fight against God. It stops the argument. It stops the justification for ourselves, but to recognize, yes, we're worse than we imagined, but God is so much better than we imagined, and therefore there's peace, there's healing. Here's how John Calvin describes it. He says, "This is the wonderful exchange which, becoming Son of Man with us, he has made us sons of God with him. That by his descent to earth, he has prepared an ascent to heaven for us. That by taking on our mortality, he has conferred his immortality upon us. That accepting our weakness, he has strengthened us by his power. That receiving our poverty unto himself, he has translated his wealth to us. And that taking the weight of our iniquity upon himself, which oppresses us, he has clothed us with his righteousness." So, what do we see when we look at God? We are to see grace, compassion, wisdom, kindness, generosity, a costly love. And when we can see that, really believing that this is not only the nature of God, but who God is to us, it heals. It brings peace. In verse 4, we think God had cursed Jesus because we cursed him. And in verse 8, we see that Jesus actually bore God's curse. So we were almost right. We considered him cursed by God, but it was because we were cursing him. And then we realized that this was God bearing the curse himself, the very curse that we otherwise would bear on our own. We were close, but not close enough. Jesus really was stricken for our sake, but it wasn't because we did it and God is like us. It is because we're not like God, and this is who God is for us. He bears this so that we have peace. So, how bad things are, we're like sheep who have gone astray. And the test case is when the perfect comes, what do? We're disinterested, we're aggravated, we're aggressive. But this is how good God is, that the servant came into the world to be acquainted with our grief so that he would bear our iniquities, so that we can have a righteousness not earned or achieved, but given to us, though we didn't deserve it. And so here's the third thing, how wise we need to be. Wisdom in the Bible certainly requires information. You need to see things, you need to understand, you need to process things. But wisdom is much more profound than that. It's not simply that you know the right things, but you can discern situations and you can live in the world in a way that is just and upright and promotes health. All of us, some of us are not pretending that we're trying to make the world a better place. We're just trying to get what we can out of it. Most of us want the world to be a better place. We know that there's something good about fixing problems, investing ourselves, and we just don't know how to do it, or we run out of patience. The wisdom of Jesus, who comes into the hostility, and the way he deals with it by bearing it, it's remarkable, it's unthinkable. If we were to try to come up with a plan, is that what we would come up with? And then who could we elect to actually go and do it? There's something uniquely wise about God's perspective, that this is how he chose to repair things in a loving, sacrificial way in order to cause us to return. And so verse 13 of chapter 52, "Behold, my servant shall act wisely." And you'd think this sounds like the worst plan ever, that he's going to come. Wouldn't he come prepared with a better argument? Wouldn't he come with an escape plan? Somehow this is the wisdom of God that heals things. And so verse 11 of chapter 53 says it's by his knowledge. Jesus is the one who has true understanding. And so in 53:10, where it says it was the will of the Lord, Jesus comes aligned, the Father and the Son, to do God's will, with true wisdom, with true understanding, to actually change things. And here's what we see in 53:10. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. So we meet God in the beginning of the Bible as one who is the giver of life. And then we read the story of Scripture where humanity simply takes life, one story after another. Jesus comes to give his own life, because when his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He did this so that there would be a change. And so this guy that I was interacting with, who was very angry that religious people are like sheep, to a certain degree, he was right, but he was missing a number of things. And one is that all of us are like sheep who have gone astray. It's not just religious people. But also, while Jesus did come and say, I am the good shepherd, and I will lead you. And so the shepherding metaphors of the Bible continue to be applied in the teaching of Jesus. He did not come to make us sheep who would be part of his flock, but he came to make us offspring. We are like sheep who have gone astray, but we are also like children who return to the Father. And it's that transformation that Jesus became like a sheep to go to the slaughter, the Son who becomes like a sheep, so that sheep who have gone astray become like sons and daughters of God. And that's what's remarkable. Yes, we're still like sheep. We need somebody to lead us and protect us and follow us. But more than that, we're like children of God, invited to be part of a family. And it's that change, that realization of God's value, our place, our belonging, that brings peace, that brings healing. And so Jesus is a man of sorrows. Is he just a guy that was negative? He didn't suffer these things because he was spiteful or because he wanted to passive-aggressively show us what the Father is angry about. In verse 11 of chapter 53, it is out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. He did this with a view towards something good. He was willing to endure this, not because he loves misery, but because he loves us, because he values life. He would give up his own life. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see, and he shall be satisfied. And it's that satisfaction that, as we think about our lives, what do we want? We don't want descending lives of decreasing health and losing our finances and having to make room in our position where we work for the next younger, brighter, up-and-coming person. But we want to know that the future can be better than the present. And that's what this story tells us, that for any who believe in Christ, the future will be present, because better than the present, because at present we have a new identity. We have God's love. We go from sinful and straying to following and righteous. And it changes our goals. So Jesus is wise because he was willing to endure these things to be satisfied, to bring life. And then he tells us, look, the Christian life is not going to be easy, but let's be honest, no life is easy. Life in this world will always have challenges, disappointments, discouragements. Is there a path where you're courageous enough to face those things knowing the outcome is worth it? Or do you need to avoid it because the thing you want most in life is comfort or prosperity? And then suffering goes against those things. Or you want to know that everyone respects you, and then suffering exposes your weakness. And the kinds of things that we're holding on to in this battle to not simply receive God's grace and to trust him and to walk with him, our souls are not satisfied. But we're told here, behold the servant, the one who acts wisely. And it's not simply that through what he has done for you that you will have peace, but you could follow him in life and find that actually his peace goes with you. Why? Because life is easy? No. Jesus warns us that life will not be easy. If this is how they treated me, this is how they will treat you. Give up your violent ways. Be a person who speaks only truth and don't deceive. Will people welcome you? Yes, sometimes. Will they reject you? Surely, sometimes. And so the goal is not to say suffering is superior, so we need to suffer. It's more to recognize we need a greater goal. If our goal is my comfort, or people's opinions of me, or my justifying my existence, anything that challenges those things will cause such trouble to our souls we won't be able to endure it. We're given a new goal. We're told here that Jesus accomplishes for us what we need. Life is given to us as a gift. And as we receive it, the satisfactions of our souls, that through our lives, that we are going somewhere, that we will have a welcome at the end of it, allows us sometimes to make wise choices to go around suffering, something that you recognize as unnecessary. I could avoid this, so I will. but it also allows us to go through it when the path through is the right path, when we have a greater goal than just what people think of me or my own satisfaction, but there's something to say, but if I love as Jesus loved, I could go to the very people who might wound me as I'm trying to love for them. And I want to be wise, but I also am going to be constrained by love. And therefore, that larger goal allows us to go into the world with all of its brokenness and find that we're not set off course in a self-protective way, but in following Jesus, we're able to live differently. There's a book by a guy named Paul Miller called The J Curve. And he uses the first initial of Jesus's name, J, with the way we do our numerals, our letters, where the pattern of Jesus is he goes down, but then he goes back up. It's death and resurrection. And what's interesting about the J is that it's not an inverted bell curve, but going down, when it goes back up, it goes higher than it was. And that's the thing is, Jesus was always exalted. But having done what he did, there's something far greater about him and what he's accomplished. And what Paul Miller says in the book is that that's actually the pattern of following Jesus, that we're frequently called to descend, to humble ourselves, to take on what's hard and difficult. But we do so knowing it's not paying our dues. We're not atoning for our own sins. We can't do any of that. This is the path of love, of wisdom, of righteousness in a fallen world. Is sometimes the good thing is the hard thing. But we have the trust that God does not abandon his faithful ones. And so Jesus, who gave himself to death, was raised. And therefore, if he did that for us, we could give ourselves away with confidence that we will be raised. It's the descent that's hard. Mount Everest. It's a remarkable thing. People so want to climb it that they pay $50,000, $75,000 for a guide and the equipment. Every year, the average is 6 people die. This is a hobby. It's not like people are going up there for some essential thing, but that's human beings. We want to conquer. We want greatness. More than 200 bodies just permanently on the mountain, as far as we know, of hikers who have died, and they just can't get them down. The interesting thing is, statistically, most people who die on that hike die on the descent, not on the ascent. I would think that's where you have the heart attack, that you're pushing to get forward, the air is thinning out. But it seems that actually there's something about that moving towards a goal that motivates, and people strive for that. And once they get to the other side, then they're exhausted. Then they're in what they call the death zone above 26,000 feet, where the air is thin, and they've been there long enough that their judgment is not sharp. And then in the tired going down after having achieved the summit, that's where mistakes are made. People slip, they fall, they stir an avalanche. The danger of the descent. So from a Christian perspective, there's danger on the ascent of our pride, of starting to flatter ourselves, of starting to think that we're better than others. And we need to be careful of that. We should have an ascending life. We should strive to be more and better, but to be humble about it. But there's something particular about these periods where we go down, where things are failing, where things are falling apart, where we're experiencing rejection or humiliation, that if we're otherwise doing well, there's a certain weakness there that exposes our frailty as humanity. That's when the worst comes out of us. And what we're told is Jesus descended to ascend. And he descended in order to meet us at the very bottom so that our lives would ascend. And so, yes, life has ups and downs. But now in those down periods, when they come, we don't need to lose hope. We don't need to start to think that my future is guaranteed to be worse than my present, that the best is behind me. But we're told that by faith that Jesus came and he did all these things for us. He's so gracious and kind. If God is that generous, we could continue to follow him through. And so when we go through those periods, that if we're called to do something that's important, that's valuable, that's honorable, even if it's hard, even if it's costly, we do it knowing that the one who forgives, who pardons, who clothes, who did all these things for us won't abandon us. And so, verse 3, Jesus became a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And we as a church have this theme of walking with God in wearying times. The thing that we keep in mind as we become ourselves acquainted or reacquainted with grief is that now we're not alone in it. That's the thing is, Jesus, he came. He came to be with us, so we don't walk alone. We have a shepherd, we have a brother, we have presence, we have a guide, and therefore we can live differently. And so as you reflect on this passage, there's a conviction that we are not yet who we should be, but God is so much more than we imagine, and he's with us. So let's go this week and practice the J curve. Where in humility can we do what is good and right, even if it's costly, trusting that God will bless it in some way. Let's live that way as a community. Let me pray for us. Our Father, we grapple with so much confusion where it's hard to see the truth. We're defensive, we're prideful, we're wounded. We grapple with shame, and you are so gracious, not simply to show us that we need mercy and forgiveness, but to do it in a way that's not to humiliate us, but in a way that's to free us. That we could be honest that you know us more than we know ourselves, and yet your love is enduring, and you sent Jesus into the world to do all these things so that we would have his peace, and so that we could be healed. By your Spirit, do a work of healing in us, Lord, where we're still fighting to hold on to something that's poisoning us. Lord, today may we let go of it. Where we're still trying to claim a righteousness of our own that's failing us, may we let go and take hold of the righteousness of Christ. May we get rid of everything that's poisoning us and our relationships and our world. And may we take hold of everything that would give us life. And so may today be a day where we came in like sheep that had gone astray, and we leave like children who are part of a family. And so may we follow Jesus, our shepherd, but our brother, the one who gave himself so that we can now give ourselves, knowing that our future is hopeful because it's been established in Christ. Help us with these things, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.